Peaceable. Peaceable. I have remembered how to spell that word for 56 years, ever since the Washington, D.C. area finals of the National Spelling Bee. I was in 6th grade, and I didn't spell it that way, of course. Down to 3 contestants. I got this short, easy word, and I spelled it Peacable. Ding. How is it that I can remember this one word, but not a single one of all the dozen or so that I must have spelled correctly that afternoon so long ago? All it takes is one flaw, and our whole experience is suddenly tuned around that single imperfection. It happens in sports, it happens in music, it happens in office presentations and political campaigns and counting up the till after a day's business. It happens in medicine, much to our terror and dismay. It happens in marriages, in relationships with siblings and parents and children. It happens when we're fighting the pandemic and when we're protecting the integrity of our democratic republic's political processes, when we're working to end racism, when we're trying to change the way our social and economic system treats its most vulnerable participants. We measure success by how perfectly the outcome matches our vision, our hope. If it falls short in any way, we feel we've failed. In much of Western religion, there is a tendency to think of the world as a fallen place, and of humankind as broken. In that part of the spiritual tradition, this fallen world is a place of pain and suffering, and we can't help but fall short of our aspirations and God's expectations because we're broken. Until someday we're united with God, not through our own efforts or because we deserve it, but just because God wants it to be so. In God alone, in that tradition, lies perfection. And for human beings, perfection is not to be achieved in this life, but in a life yet to come. And for our own spiritual peace, we have to learn to look forward to the world to come and to set ourselves apart from this imperfect, fallen world. This belief in perfection, unattainable by humanity until after our deaths, a perfection only to be found in a spiritual realm of which this world is just a dim reflection, it's deeply ingrained in Western culture. Having placed perfection in the category of the divine and declared it to be unachievable by human beings, of course, human beings have been trying to achieve it ever since. We are predictably stubborn that way. It's not surprising that imperfection is hard for us to accept. Imperfection is a symptom of our fallen state. It's a marker of our inability to realize our own aspirations. It's shameful. Imperfection is a reminder of our mortality and our unworthiness. But in our religious tradition, we who believe that humankind is not unworthy, we who believe that in this life and in this world are all the perfection that we can ever need, we who believe that it's in our hands to make this world a place of justice and equity and compassion, even we can be caught up in the striving for perfection and the dissatisfaction with imperfection that is so much a part of our culture. We're accustomed to saying the words "nobody's perfect" as words of comfort. Nobody's perfect, we might say to someone who is trying too hard, or someone who's made a mistake and is taking it too much to heart. Nobody's perfect, I might say to myself after I've managed to forget a meeting that's been scheduled for 3 weeks. There is a sense of resignation in that phrase, nobody's perfect. An acceptance of shortcoming that says, well, there's nothing I can do about it, really. So I might as well learn to get used to failing and disappointing myself and everybody else. It's not, as you can see, generally a happy thing to say. It's a reluctant admission. Nobody's perfect, darn it. Maybe we need to learn not to curse imperfection, but to celebrate it. One of the central lessons that I have learned in 20 years of ministry is that perfection is not a healthy human aspiration. That's not just something I say to make myself feel better about my own failures or mistakes, or to help someone else be more gentle with themselves. I am serious. Perfection is not a healthy human aspiration. Perfection is impervious. It's static. It's unchangeable. Perfection can't be improved. It can only be marred. Perfection isn't alive. Perfection is a false ideal, a soul-killing, impossible goal that doesn't reward action and engagement, since we know that they're always going to fall short of the mark. It's imperfection, not perfection, that gives us a place to engage fully with our lives and with the needs of our beautiful and beautifully imperfect world. Imperfection tells me that whatever the flaws of my outcomes, the effort matters. If I can stop wishing I were a perfect singer, I can relax and I can help to make music happen and encourage others to join in. If I can stop wishing I were a perfect remodeler, I can put cabinets and faucets and paint in a bathroom to create a space that looks fresh and new and comfortable. We may not ever see a perfect end to the pandemic, but we are going to gradually find ways we can be safer together and move together and sing together and laugh and cry together. We may not find the perfect political candidates who will fulfill our every goal for a better society, but we will find partners who will do the work side by side with us as best they can. We may not achieve universal protection of voting rights, or perfect comprehensive immigration reform, or an end to poverty in our lifetimes, or to all of the many inequities and inequalities that disfigure our human community. We may not ever find a perfect end to that, but we can help people to look at each other and to see a fellow human being instead of a stereotype, a threat, an enemy. Flaws mark our efforts as our own efforts. That bubble in the corner with the ceiling, that makes it unmistakable that I did the mud and taping on that wall. The loose stitch in the bumpy knitted slippers, that tells me that it's my daughter's own handwork that's warming my feet. That stained glass window that's in our own sanctuary, it isn't a perfect representation of any particular sanctioned Unitarian Universalist flaming chalice. And it might not technically really be stained glass at all, but stained acrylic. But it was made by someone who was part of this congregation, someone who was beloved here in their time. And its uniqueness marks it as specifically our own. And it's beautiful. Imperfection connects us with each other's humanity. Sometimes imperfection is an intentional part of an aesthetic. The dancer Martha Graham once wrote that in some Native American weaving, a weaver will intentionally create a flaw in a blanket to let its soul come out. Peter Mayer sang earlier about an ancient tradition of mending broken ceramic bowls with precious metals, a true celebration of imperfection. There's also a style of work in Japanese pottery called wabi-sabi that incorporates a simple or rustic appearance and subtle intentional flaws, leading the observer to appreciate that in art and in life, nothing is permanent, nothing is finished, nothing is perfect. Nothing is perfect. In Wabi Sabi, this is not a sad acknowledgement that the world is a broken place, less worthy than some perfect heaven we might find someday. It is instead a simple fact of our lives, something to be observed with serenity and with appreciation. It's an invitation to further effort, to try again, to do more, to taking the time and trouble to create what we know will be a flawed object that nonetheless reveals something about ourselves and improves our lives. Coming to terms with the reality of our own shortcomings can open our hearts to an embrace of each other's failings and hurts and needs. Imperfection is a doorway to compassion, a compassion that is much more difficult for someone who lives in pursuit of the perfection every day. When I have talked over the years with people who are considering the ministry as a calling for their lives, one question I've always asked them has been where in their lives they can tell a story of a real disappointing failure. I want to know if they have had some of the veneer of perfection sanded off their self-image. If you have never fallen short of your own aspirations or your own expectations or hopes, how will you have the humility to offer healing to someone who has? Empathy is not the same thing as pity. Pity is what you feel for an inferior, someone who suffers things that you're sure are never going to happen to you. Empathy allows us to genuinely share another's experience and the feelings that it triggers in them and in ourselves. If we can't learn to celebrate imperfection, the world we live in today will drive us to a desperate spiritual weariness and desolation. The inequities of our social systems, the harshness of life for the poor and the vulnerable, the global politics of ancient hatreds and power lust, the damage to the very earth and her climate, which we've already done. No solution that we can propose to any of these is going to be perfect. All of them will take generations of partial, flawed efforts to change in any lasting way. And what of our own lives? If we learn nothing else from the hard realities of the pandemic years, I hope and pray that we'll have learned how many things there are in the world that can't just be fixed. We may never return to the way of life we took for granted before all of our bubbles burst. And we will still find ourselves living lives worthy of celebration in a world that is achingly, magically beautiful, even though it will never quite be what we imagine it could be. And even before the pandemic, we ourselves were not going to achieve that perfectly balanced life with career and children and volunteer time and entertainment and outdoor life and church or temple all settled in their assigned places, none of them overshadowing the others and all of them synergistically interconnected. We were never going to get there. We weren't going to get there in 2019. And we surely aren't going to now. No matter what it says in Martha Stewart Living, or Cosmopolitan, or Simple Living, or even Body and Soul magazine. If we're going to stay engaged with this world, this real world that we live in, we're going to have to learn to celebrate imperfection, because that's what we're going to get. It might seem that accepting imperfection means resigning ourselves to things as they are. I don't think so. One of the things I celebrate imperfection is that it invites us forward to new and greater efforts, knowing that nothing is final, knowing that our own efforts don't have to be perfect in order to be valuable or important. Our aspiration to make things better is what calls us forward, not our duty to achieve an impossible goal of perfection. Our faith teaches us that it is this world and this life that give us meaning and purpose, not some other world, not some other life. We are not striving to arrive in a static, perfect, idealized heaven in which everything is fully realized and all is utterly complete and there's nothing more to be done. We are working to live, to be real, to be fully human and fully engaged in the dynamic, constantly evolving, imperfect paradise of this world, this life, now, today. The great sage Leonard Cohen, a paragon of imperfection, if ever there was one, tells us there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Our task, the task of human living, is not to mend all the cracks, even with gold. Our task is to find the light, to let the light get in, to reflect the light, to magnify the light. May we be the ones to make it so. And now I close as Brian prepares to invite you into breakout rooms for conversation. I offer you these closing words. May we all be seekers and magnifiers of the light that comes from the source of all, however we might name it. May our light flow from the source of good, whether that source is a divine one, or a transcendent mystery, or just a great spirit of human aspiration, spirit of justice, spirit of truth, spirit of compassion. May our light come from others who seek with us and guide us and give us someone to lean on. We are the light. We ourselves, each of us and all of us, shining into the dark, cracked places where we engage with the deep needs of our own lives and our own commitments, where we engage with the deep needs of the greater world of which we are a part. We are the light. Let us shine. Let's go in peace. As the flame of our chalice is extinguished, as its light is kindled in each of our hearts. Let's bring it back when we come together again, and between now and then, let's pass it on. Go in peace.